All right, welcome back everybody for the second part. This part I'm going to talk a bit more in detail about Chinese politics, Chinese economics as well. Of course, we've touched upon both subjects already a bit during the history. I mean, it's a little bit difficult to talk about history and not mention any politics or economics. But there's a few more aspects I want to talk about these two areas. And then at the end of the presentation, again, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the opportunity that you have to do an internship in China and see everything I've talked about it firsthand. Okay. The Chinese political system since 1949. Why 1949? I think that's obvious from the first part. Here you see a picture of 4 leaders in that decade. The one on the left, you know, Mao Zedong. The second one, Deng Xiaoping. Okay. The third one, anybody? The fourth one? The last one? Xi Jinping. Okay, so the third one is Jiang Zemin and then Hu Jintao. You can see, yeah, I know, Chinese names are a bit difficult to remember. It's easier to remember the presidents of the United States than the presidents of China. But maybe in a few decades this will change as well. People will get so used to Chinese names. Again, 1 in 5 people in the world have a Chinese name, that actually we start being able to recognize them and remember them more easily. Why I show this picture here on top is because it shows very clearly also the evolution that China has had in this era politically. In 1949, it's as communist as you can be. The dress is communist, the whole ideology is communist, the star on the hat, the link with the USSR, very ideological. The next man, Deng Xiaoping, as I told you, was a pragmatist. He realized that it didn't matter, as his own expression said, it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. That was his famous catch quote. Who heard this quote before? Nobody heard this before? It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it's able to catch mice, that's what matters. There was this very famous quote which expresses his pragmatism. What he meant was, it doesn't matter whether we call ourselves communists or capitalists or whatever. What matters is that our economy starts working again and that we can feed our people. So this was his attitude. It was very much pragmatic, business-oriented. But of course in the dress code in 1978, he couldn't afford yet to suddenly start wearing a Western suit like his successors started doing. Because this was just after Mao. China was still also the Cold War era. So there was still this opposition towards the United States. So on the outside, Deng Xiaoping remained a communist. But on the inside, he thought, okay, we need to get away from this paradigm, capitalism against communism. No, we need to go to market economy within a communist state. This is how we'll develop the country. Then the later generations, they started, you could say, becoming more Western, but this is just the outside. Again, as I told you, it's not because somebody wears a suit that he's suddenly a Westerner. This doesn't really change anything in the way of thinking. Of course, the color of the tie, that didn't change. That's still very nice communist red. Who knows, maybe one day they'll have a different tie as well, but that would be really a huge shocking change in China. So a few characteristics, oh, there we go. A few characteristics of Chinese politics. The first one, as I mentioned, is this is sort of the ideology of, or the thought of Deng Xiaoping. Let's get over the name calling. Let's get over of, well, are we now Marxist or Leninist or socialist or capitalist or communist? Everything, it doesn't really matter. In name, nothing changes. We're still the Chinese Communist Party. But what we actually do changes completely. We have to be more pragmatic. So this is how the Chinese describe their current system. It's a market economy with socialism, with Chinese characteristics. And what these Chinese characteristics actually mean, that can change over time, but it's the perfect vague catchphrase to implement all kinds of changes without having to defend yourself. So you can open up your economy to foreigners now. You can have certain cities in the West where foreigners can come to invest. That's our Chinese characteristic. So this way, they have kind of a very vague description that allows them to change no matter how they want. This is very different from political parties in the West. where, especially in Flanders, but I think also in Wallonia, over the past decades, we've seen so many parties change their name. CVP became CD&V, SP became SPA. I don't know if you've had that in Wallonia, if there was some name changes as well, but yeah, I think, what was it, Defi is now a new one also. It used to be different. They change the name, but the content actually is the same. It doesn't really change anything. In China is the opposite. The name, the Communist Party of China, never changes, always the same. But what the Communist Party of China represents in terms of policies, yeah, has changed day and night since the 50s until now. So, on paper, it remains a communist party, but what it implements every year, every decade, is very different. What is crucial, however, is that the Communist Party wants to keep the monopoly on power. So, they will not allow that other other political parties gain power in China. Now, there are some other political parties in China. That's a very commonly not very known fact, actually. But there's about 5 or 6 other political parties in the Chinese system, but they have a mere consultation role. So they never actually get to decide anything. They can come with some proposals, they can come with some ideas, but in the end it's the Communist Party that will decide. Very similar to, again, a dynasty. The Chinese Communist Party looks very much like a dynasty, where every president is sort of a new emperor taking over from the last one. And as I said, it has evolved a lot, because under Mao was a dictator. Not right away, but in the 60s with the Cultural Revolution, this man became a dictator. It was impossible to argue with that man. He was always right, and you just had to follow him. This has changed a lot into sort of an intra-party democracy, I call it. What does that mean? Basically that within the party, there is room for different opinions. And there are 2 factions sort of fighting against each other. There's the more ideological faction that wants to stay more truly communist, that wants to stay more truly Chinese. And then there's the more liberal faction that says, no, China needs to modernize further. We need to keep having Westerners come in. We need to have more of Western technology. And we also need to change our habits. We need to keep Chinese tradition, but we need to modernize it. Whereas the more hardliners, you could say, in the party, are much more China nationalistic. So this is a dialogue, but often a very fierce dialogue that's happening within the party, but that you don't see on the outside. So if you see a Chinese political congress on TV, if you ever go to China, you'll see the camera sort of zooming in on the faces. It's usually men, there's almost only men, of the most important people, one by one, and they all sit there, show no expression on their face, and it looks like everybody is in harmony. But that's of course only the surface. Behind the scenes there are huge power battles between these different factions, but they don't show this to the people. Again, because they also believe in this idea of unity. Even if we disagree within the party, we need to keep it to ourselves, because if it becomes an open strife within China, we've seen the consequences a few times in our past, we don't want to get there. And so that's why there have been fairly orderly leadership changes. It has become pretty much a presidential system like you have in the United States. In the United States, usually if you have a good president, he will stay on for 8 years, like Obama. With the next one, we'll see. In China, a president usually stays on for about 10 years. So has 2 terms, because the Chinese work with 5-year plans. And every 5 years, there's a huge conference, the lines are set out for the next 5 years, and often that's when some leadership changes are happening. So the first years of a new leader, like we've had with Xi Jinping, is the years where the new leader still needs to take control. Because he has sort of come to the foreground as a new leader, but he has these 2 factions that were fighting actually who is going to take over now. So once the leader is in place, he still needs to sort of sort things out a little bit to make sure that everybody will be behind them. Now China is facing a number of huge political challenges in the decades to come. The first question, of course, is can this one-party state coexist with a prosperous China? Because that has been the bet from the West, especially the United States, hoping that, okay, China's economy is opening up, let's go and invest there, people will get richer, the middle class will rise, people will have more and more demands, and bit by bit it will become a democracy. This happened actually in Taiwan, which is a bit the case then that they hoped that that would happen. In Taiwan, The Kuomintang, who lost the civil war, fled to Taiwan. They were in power for several decades, but at some point they opened up power to other political parties, and now you have pretty much a Western system with elections, and every 4 or 5 years then the one in power will maybe shift to a different party. People hoped that this would happen in China, and especially in Tiananmen, of course, in '89, people thought now there's really democratic revolution coming, but it didn't happen. And now we're 25 years later, and it didn't happen. It's still, the current system is still in place. And there's a question, of course, can it stay in place or not? It's hard to say. I'm not going to give you an opinion on that, because so many experts have been proven wrong already about that. It seems to work pretty well, as long as there is economic growth. But there are some threats. One is, of course, the media, the press. How do you deal with the press when actually there's only one party in power? I mean, in our Western newspapers, in Belgium, you can have a different journalist writing a different opinion on this or that party should no longer be in the government, or their policies are bad, and so on and so on. Impossible in China. You cannot criticize the Communist Party, because if you do that, you question the fact that the Communist Party has, in a way, the mandate of heaven, has the right to rule the country. So if you do that, you become dangerous. So you have to criticize in a different way, a little bit more subtle way. Journalists, for example, a very famous documentary, which looks a little bit like Al Gore's documentary, or had the same importance, I would say, was Under the Dome, was about air pollution in China. So this journalist made a 1.5 hour presentation about air pollution in China, and then put it up on stage, a little bit like Al Gore did about, what was the name of his movie again? It escapes me. Huh? Who? No. I forgot, anyway, doesn't matter. The famous presentation about Al Gore about climate change. This, when it appeared online, in a few days, this documentary was seen by 300 million people. So this journalist had exposed the issue of air pollution in China, had shown how certain officials are corrupt, and that therefore a lot of companies that are pollute actually get away with it because they pay a corrupt official who doesn't do anything about it, that actually the environmental ministry is involved in these issues as well. She had exposed all of that. In a few days' time, 300 million people saw this documentary on the internet. A few days later, it was taken offline. So the communist government realized, okay, we have to be very careful here. We can give some freedom to the press. The press can criticize some things that are happening in our country, but we need to be aware that with the internet today, if there is something interesting out there, it can be seen in a few days by hundreds of millions of people. So, not easy. When you're one-state party, you're very sensitive about every criticism that could be given, because it could be seen by the people as, yeah, but the party who's in power, they don't deserve to be in power, because look at all the bad things happening. We should have a new party in power. So this is very, very difficult. Yeah, what I mentioned, the social media. Again, they've seen how Western social media played a role in the Arab Spring in some countries. These are blocked in China, but China has its own social media. So it's not because you don't have Facebook and YouTube and Twitter that you can't easily share things among Chinese people. They have their own social media on which people publish things, and these are constantly censored, very tightly controlled. These companies need to agree with the government that they will submit all kinds of information about the user, and there's a lot of government users on these social media platforms. So there's a lot of people employed by the state to put all kinds of positive messages about what the government is doing. There's an army of Chinese people working on censoring the internship. It's a huge effort. They seem to manage quite well so far to sort of keep it in check, but from time to time something will maybe miss their attention, and they have to be very careful, because once it tilts online, things could go very fast. So this is a challenge. The second challenge politically is the corruption. And this is something that Xi Jinping has realized, and is sort of his prime mission that he starts his 10-year reign with, is try to root out the corruption, especially at the local level. So at local level, there's a typical corrupt phenomenon between property developers, local politicians, and the banks. So what happens is local politicians, they can make the decisions about where new real estate developments will go. They can decide this piece of land goes to you as a developer. You can build very nice skyscrapers there, nice building, housing blocks, if you pay me. So, obviously these developers, they see a huge opportunity to make money. They pay to a politician. And then the politician and the property developer get in touch with the banks. Now the banks are state-owned. So also there, politicians are in charge, actually, of the banks. And we've seen that for a while, if politicians get in charge of banks, it doesn't really work that well either. In China, all the banks, the big banks are still state-owned. So it's very easy to get access to funding if you have access to politicians. So if you know the right politician, he will give you the right piece of land, you will get the right funding from a bank, and you can start your property development. But of course, there's people who lose as well there. The first one is the people who lose their land. Often this is peasant land that is taken away by the local government to put new building blocks, and these peasants are given some compensation for the loss of their land, the loss of their house, but often very, very limited, and often a lot of compensation money actually disappears in the pockets of corrupt officials. This has, in many places in China, sparked protests, which usually stay local, but again, with the media we have today, local protests, the media coverage of that can spread very quickly, so they have to be very careful. So Xi Jinping realized that this corruption issue really is dangerous for the Communist Party. It could be one of the kind of things that makes the Communist Party lose the mandate of heaven. Because in many dynasties also, towards the end of the dynasty, why a dynasty in the end disappeared was because it was through and through corrupt. So this is something he's paying a lot of attention to. Will he succeed or not? It's not easy to say, because often these corruption campaigns are also used for a political purpose, is to get rid of all your political opponents. But what do you do with your political friends if they are corrupt? Do you leave them in power, or do you also put them off? And that's where he's not always equally consistent, in that corruption charges are often issued against opponents, but maybe the friends actually take over and are just as corrupt. So will he succeed to actually root out corruption? I think it's a work that's going to take several decades in China. And the most important challenge for the Communist Party and for the system as such is, what if there is an economic downturn in China? Because since '89, when there was a risk that they would lose the mandate of heaven, where they lose the permission to rule the country, they have succeeded so fantastically well in bringing economic growth to China. China has grown more than 10% per year, doubling GDP every 6 or 7 years. It was fantastic. I'll talk about more in the next part about economics. But the Communist Party has not had to deal yet with an economic downturn. We've had, of course, the global financial crisis, which hit Western countries really badly. And what happens then in our political systems? Okay, but the politicians who are in charge, they get punished in the next elections and there is a change, right? In China, that's not possible. If there is an economic downturn, yeah, you can't say, well, yeah, we don't want the Communist Party anymore, we want a different party. No, not possible. So they need to avoid this economic downturn, which is what they managed to do during the global financial crisis, but at a huge cost. So China, when the US economy collapsed, the European economy collapsed, this also had a huge impact on China, because China was very dependent on export. So what the Chinese did at that point is they created a huge amount of debt to start all kinds of infrastructure projects to keep the economy going. And they managed, they succeeded. Like China did not see a recession, did not see the collapse that we had in the West. But the cost of that is, of course, they created a huge debt bubble. To some measures higher than what we have in the West, where it's still quite a poor country. So can they survive such a downturn or not? That's really the question, because that's where their whole legitimacy is. In the past, after the Second World War, I explained to you, after the Civil War, the Communist Party and Mao Zedong had its credibility, its legitimacy, because of the victory against the Japanese. If you liberate the country after decades of occupation, you deserve it to be the ruler of the country, right? That makes sense. But since Tiananmen, the legitimacy is different. You cannot keep saying, well, we liberated the country from the Japanese, so we should be in power. At some point, it expires, right? This legitimacy. The new legitimacy has been economic growth. Because basically, the agreement between the Chinese government and the Chinese people, you could say in some sense, but it's a silent agreement, a silent understanding is, okay, the Chinese people said, right, so we don't get political freedom, we don't get democracy, all right. But then at least we want to see our lives improve. The Communist Party said, okay, we cannot give you this democracy, we want to remain in power, but we'll do everything we can to give you economic welfare. And they managed. Millions and millions of people were lifted out of poverty. Millions and millions of people are now entering the middle class. They have a pretty good life in big cities. They can afford a lot of goods, they see that their children will have a better life than themselves, they can invest in their education and so on. So people are satisfied. But if economic growth slows down, and that's what's happening today, the growth used to be 10, 12%, now it's 6.5%, maybe going down to 6%. At some point there may be a major economic crisis, and if growth slows to say 2 or 3% in China, that will mean huge unemployment. And this is already a challenge they're facing, because the Chinese economy is still characterized, I'll talk about it more later, by a lot of big state-owned companies which are very inefficient, but which employ millions of people and who are losing money every day. You cannot keep them alive eternally, but the Chinese government does, because they need to keep the economy going. So that brings us to the Chinese economic miracle, I've called it. I think by right. I'll show you in one graph, actually, visually, the catch-up movement that China has made over the past decades. I'll explain you the graph a little bit. I made this graph myself on a website called Gapminder. If you ever need to do a presentation where you need to compare different countries, it's a great website. It has an interactive tool where you can plot different countries on a chart, and you can choose about 500 different indicators of a country. So GDP, GDP per capita, could be life expectancy, could be internet usage, could be things like health indicators and so on. 500 different indicators that you can download for pretty much any country in the world with a historical series of at least 40, 50 years. So huge amount of data. What you see here on this graph, on the left side you see life expectancy. So how old an average Chinese or Belgian or Japanese or American would be in a certain year. And we start in 1960. On the horizontal axis, you see GDP per capita. So that's an indication of how rich are people on average. How much GDP is there per person of a country. And then the size of this ball on the chart is the size of the total economy. So here we see, let's see if we can take this with me. We start in 1960. China is very small overall economy. On a global scale, it doesn't really play a role. It's very poor. The average income for Chinese is $100 per year. So that's less than $1 a day, right? $1 for 3 days. Not easy to live. And the life expectancy has gone as low as a little bit above 30. This is because of the Great Leap Forward, which I mentioned to you earlier in the history part. This huge initiative where China wanted to develop, but what actually became an agricultural disaster with many people dying. At this moment, in the West, Belgium, Japan, United States have a similar level of age expectancy, life expectancy, about 70 years. Of course, different sizes in economy. But there used to be a time that the Belgian economy had the same size as the Chinese economy. Somewhere in the 50s, China and Belgium had the same size overall economy. That's of course impossible to imagine today. It's also something that will never come back, but it shows you how non-existent China was in those days on a global scale. It didn't play any role. Then things start changing. So first in the 60s, the economy still stays small, because we're still under Mao Zedong. It doesn't develop well, but fortunately they managed to fix the health system. So people start growing older again, and they reach about 60 years. Then in the 70s, we have Deng Xiaoping, late 70s, who start opening up the economy, and that's when the economy starts taking off. Of course from a very low level, but growth rates 10, 12% per year, which means that an economy doubles roughly every 6 years. So do you know this little trick about dividing 70 by the growth percentage? No? Okay. There's a little statistical trick that if you want to know in how many years a country's economy will double, you can take the number 70 divided by the growth rate. So if an economy grows at 7%, you take 70 divided by 7, that's 10. That means it takes 10 years to double. If an economy grows at 10%, you take 70 divided by 10%, it means it is 7, so it doubles in about 7 years. So in these years, it doubles every 5 or 6 years, the total power, the total amount of the Chinese economy. And now we're approaching the point where China is equally big in economic terms as the United States. That's of course a pivotal moment in the world's history, because no matter in which age, it's always been the case that those countries that are economically powerful, economically strong, also become dominant in other areas, whether it's politics, whether it's geopolitics, culture, and so on. The economy is your basis of your civilization. If your economy is weak, if you cannot feed your people, you can forget to play an important role on the global stage. So we see China approaching the others very quickly, but there's still a huge gap in terms of GDP per capita. Roughly, if we say that the American economy and the Chinese economy have the same size, we've learned that the Chinese have 1.3, almost 1.4 billion people. In the United States, there's a bit more than 300 million. So let's say China has 4 times more people than the United States, but has the same economic size. That means on average, every Chinese only has 1/4 of the wealth of an average American. So that shows there's still a huge potential for China to catch up further. The economy is not done growing. A few characteristics about this economy. First of all is that the state is still a very dominant player. All land, for example, is owned by the government. So you lease your land from the government gives the land to you temporarily, but it remains ownership of the government. There's big state-owned companies in pretty much all crucial sectors. So I've mentioned banking, same goes for telecom, infrastructure works, heavy metal, and so on. All these crucial sectors for a country, for an economy, are still in the hands of the state. But these state economies are incredibly inefficient and just not able to keep up with innovation. A bit like in the communist era of Mao, if there is no external motivation, if there are no external influences allowed, and if politicians control a company, you can be pretty sure the companies will not be well run, because there's all kinds of political interests that enter that make sure that these companies just are not efficient. So there's millions of Chinese being employed by these state-owned companies, but these state-owned companies, by capitalist measures, they are completely bankrupt. Every year, they just make a huge loss. The only way why they keep existing is because the government keeps putting money in it. You could compare it maybe with the Belgian railways in a way, which is in a way managed by the state and therefore, unfortunately, not very efficient. So what do you do with these companies? Do you keep them? Do you get rid of them? If you get rid of them, you will have, in a very short period of time, millions of people who lose their job. And then there's a risk of course, unrest, a risk that people start questioning the Communist Party as being the one that brings welfare to the country. So they have to do this very carefully. But not doing anything is not an option either, because then all this taxpayer money just goes in these companies that are actually not doing a good job, and your country, your government may go bankrupt. So this is a difficult challenge that they need to deal with. And finally, where the state plays an important role, and I've mentioned it already, especially in the internet, they favor the homegrown companies. But also in many other sectors, if the Chinese can, they will try to make sure that their own company becomes strong, even if it's a private company, it doesn't have to be a state-owned company, so that it can handle the competition with foreign players. They don't want to give away their market easily to foreign companies. They will protect, of course, officially the market is open. They joined the World Trade Organization. Foreign companies can invest in China, but there's still a lot of sectors with a lot of restriction, and even the sectors that are officially open, they put in all kinds of obstacles that just make it more difficult for foreign companies to do business than Chinese. So as I mentioned already, by 2025, depends a bit on how you measure GDP, the Chinese economy will become as big as the American. Actually, last measures I've seen was more 2020. But as I mentioned, only 1/4 or 1/5 in terms of wealth. And still a huge percentage of the people working in agriculture, 36%. Do you know how many it is for Belgium? What percentage of the Belgian people is employed in agriculture? Do you have an idea about this? 5%? Who else? 11? 7? 2, indeed. Just 2%. This is an indication also of how developed an economy is, because you move from agriculture to industry and later to services. The Chinese still have 36% of people live in the countryside and are farmers. These farmers are poor. They just produce for themselves. They can sell a little bit on the market, but they are poor. If they can get factory jobs, they go for it, because they earn a lot more if they are a factory worker than if they're a farmer. But the economy today is still very dependent on investment and export. And this is one of the challenges I'll get to the next slide then. China is now facing a huge transformation challenge. The way the Chinese economy has grown so fast over the past was very simple. Export and invest. So it became the factory of the world. Foreign companies went there, they produced. Chinese people get their salaries, but all the goods are exported abroad. Same with investment. What do I mean by that? Infrastructure and housing. So they build roads, they build railways, they build all kinds of projects where many people could work on, increased the economic welfare, but at some point this stops. I mean, at some point you have your roads, you have your railways, you have your housing, you cannot keep building things. At some point you need to make a switch to domestic consumption. And this is now where China is struggling a bit to keep up growth. A reason why growth is going down is because they need to make this transition. Export is not as strong as it used to be because China has become more expensive. Many companies are now changing their production locations to Vietnam, for example, because it's cheaper to produce. And as I mentioned, the investment comes often from the state. The state does not have eternal money either. At some point it stops as well. And in terms of housing, at some point everybody has an apartment to live in. You need to start doing something else. So they need to make this transition to consumer spending, which means more shopping malls, which means that Chinese people need to start spending more. But Chinese people are very cautious in spending, at least not the very rich tourists who come here, but the majority of the population not, is very cautious because there is not a good social security safety network. So if somebody loses their job, they will have to rely on the family. If somebody is ill, they don't have the health insurance like we have. So people want to keep some money on the side for worse times. And especially the older generation, they've seen a lot of bad times. So they're not just going to spend everything the way Americans do. I mean, Americans live on credit pretty much all the time. As soon as they have money, they spend, but even if they don't have money, they'll just use their credit card and spend. Chinese are very different because there is no social safety. So if China really wants to succeed in this transition to a consumption-fueled economy, it will need to do something also about its social security system and give more assurance to the people that even if they spend, they will not be broke the next day. The next challenge is cooling inflation. This was a big problem in 2011. Now actually they've succeeded because the Chinese economy has slowed down. And by slowing down, the pressure has also taken off from inflation. And they're now entering actually a new problem, which could be deflation. Especially producer prices are decreasing in China because there is so huge oversupply, which is then again linked to the state-owned companies who produce steel, for example, in huge quantities, more than the market needs, and therefore, of course, the prices are being cut. And if prices are cut in a few sectors, this has repercussions in other sectors as well, and there's a risk of getting in a deflation spiral now, actually. Another challenge is the real estate bubble. Of course, is there a bubble or not? When is the bubble going to burst? It's always hard to say. But there are a few clear examples in China of ghost cities. What do I mean by ghost cities? It's cities that were founded in China, that were erected, that developers decided we're going to have housing here for 100,000 people, and that nobody is living there. So what happened, of course, it was these corrupt links that I talked about between property developers, local politicians, and the banks, who all thought we're going to make a lot of money, but then actually nobody bought these houses. So somebody lost there as well. And this is what you happen when politicians get involved with the economy. You don't make the right economic decisions anymore. You make political decisions, not economical decisions. So there's a lot of real estate that was created like that in smaller cities in China, also to boost the local GDP number. Because every local city, local region in China needs to report the GDP numbers to the central government. And of course, you don't want to report that your GDP is only growing at 5%. No, you want to show it's growing at 8 or 9 or 10%. How do you do that? Let's build some houses, right? But then of course at some point you have way too many houses. There's a huge stock now of unused housing in China that at some point will lead to a crash of housing prices. Probably not in cities like Beijing and Shanghai, because there's still so much people flocking to these cities who want to live there. But the price increases we've seen in Shanghai, for example, in the past 5 years is incredible. It's more than doubled the cost of housing in 5 years. So could be a bubbly area as well. We'll see. And we've seen in the United States, in Ireland, in Spain, what happens if you have a real estate bubble. There's no way your economy can survive. So this is a huge challenge, because if they don't manage to prevent a housing bubble crash, that means that probably the economy will face a severe downturn, and people will question whether the Communist Party should be in power in the first place. Stock market instability. This has been in the news over the past years a few times. You see huge swings in the stock market. Sometimes it goes up 50-60% in a very short period, and then it goes down 30-40%. And what happens is that pretty much anybody starts investing in the stock market. On their mobile phones, you know, taxi drivers, they heard that a certain stock is a really good stock, they should buy it. They can just do it on a mobile phone. They invest a little money, and the next day they check, oh, it's gone up 2%, great. And the next day, oh, okay. A month later, it's gone up with 20%. Wow, fantastic. But they don't have a clue about what they're buying. They don't have a clue what the company is about. They don't have a clue about the economic data of the company. They just buy on sentiment. And of course, at some point that flips. People all of a sudden realize the prices that we have on the stock market are insane. They start selling, and of course the taxi driver is the last one to know. He loses all his money. Could lead to unrest as well. So Chinese government tried to step in when the prices crashed like more than 7% in a day. They stopped the trading. They tried to buy a lot of shares themselves to stabilize it, but it's very shaky. The Chinese stock market is still very shaky. Corruption, I've mentioned already, as a big economic challenge also. Rising income equality was mentioned by somebody at the beginning also. Especially within cities, this starts becoming so painful to the eye, in a way. You see migrant workers coming to Beijing and Shanghai who are going to live in sheds working at some building site, and right next to it there may be a Lamborghini or a Ferrari crossing the corner, you know? This is the contrast that you have right next to each other. Chinese people are very tolerant. They can accept that, but at some point it becomes a bit too much as well. If the rich really start showing off their wealth in such a ridiculous way, and people have trouble finding a job, this becomes really, really dangerous. Again, because people cannot sort of, you know, in the West you can have that too. Well, you can make a protest vote. In the next political elections, you can say the system, the way it works, is not good. There's too much inequality. I'm going to vote for a political party who's against that. In China, you can't do that. You have to accept that there is a party in power, and they're the ones. And finally, a huge problem, environmental pollution and congestion. Cities like Beijing and Shanghai, traffic-wise, is incredibly difficult to get around. In Shanghai, they tried to tackle that by, for example, raising the prices for a license plate. I'm going to let you guess, how much do you think you need to pay in Shanghai to be able to buy a license plate? So in Belgium, you need to pay a little tax, but anybody can get a license plate, right? In Shanghai, not anybody can get that, because otherwise there would just be so many cars on the road that nobody can still move. How much do you think Shanghainese are willing to pay for a license plate? In dollars, let's take it in dollars. Or euro if you want. Yeah. Let's see, it's like an auction. Who starts? Give a price. Yeah? How much? $3,000. Okay. Anybody willing to pay more? It's for a license plate, so not the car. The car you still need to buy yourself. The license plate. $3,000. And nobody more? You're not going to get much for $3,000. 15,000? Oh wow, you right away boost seriously. Okay, it's actually $20,000. So pretty much the price of a car itself. So they're making measures to stop this congestion, but it's very difficult in a city like Beijing and Shanghai. And environmental pollution, as I mentioned, is linked to corruption. You can have all kinds of agencies in place that will monitor all the pollution by companies. But if your officials who go and check a company are corrupt, you know you're not going to solve the problem. But I must say though that China is really getting very serious about tackling these issues, and is showing that also in the discussions about global warming. I mean, China is taking a leading role there, together with the United States, finally. Hopefully after the next election that will still be the case, we'll see. But China also realizes that the way the environment has been treated in the past is not sustainable. and that global warming for China could have huge consequences. Because rich countries usually can defend themselves better against the consequences of global warming. You have floods, you have all kinds of terrible storms. If you are rich, okay, you can fix it, you have an insurance system and so on. The Dutch can increase their dikes, keep the sea out and so on. For poorer countries, it's very difficult. And China could suffer incredibly from global warming, so they are very, very much motivated to do something about it as well. Now, we've talked about economic challenges. It's not only challenges, there's of course also a huge opportunity in China for pretty much any company, and that's the rise of the middle class. You see currently, 2014, 2016, 17, there's about 100 million households that are considered middle class. A middle class is considered if you earn more than $20,000 a year with your household, you consider middle class. So that means, yeah, you can buy a fridge, your smartphone, a computer maybe, and so on. But you're not exactly wealthy yet either. Still, this amount of people will increase from about 100 million to up to 400 million in just about 20 years' time. So the amount of people that is able to afford all these goods, to afford smartphones, to afford cars, for example, will go times 4 in just 20 years' time. So for companies, obviously, that's a huge opportunity. If you have certain products that people who start being a little bit more well-off, start having a little bit more money, want to buy, you want to be in China. But it's not easy. Everybody wants to be there, and as I said, the state favors their homegrown companies. Then finally, to wrap up, a few future trends that we'll see in terms of the impact that China will have on the world economy. As I've shown you throughout the presentation, in the 70s, in the 60s, China was non-existent. China was isolated, so it did not have any impact on the global economy whatsoever. The impact was 0. In the 80s, it started becoming a little bit important with starting to become the factory of the world, and had indirect impact by keeping inflation down in the West. In the 90s then, we started going to China, not to produce, but to find the Chinese consumers. And then now China is investing and actually later inventing. So what trends can we expect in the future? The first one is the continued rise of the Chinese consumer. I've just shown you that with the number of middle-class households, but this means that especially Chinese tourism, we can expect to see huge boom in the coming years. Also, Chinese luxury sectors in China are very, very popular. And also real estate. So you have now more and more Chinese flocking abroad to London, to the US, to Australia. They first go to English-speaking countries because it's more accessible to them. And it's also countries they could consider migrate. But so they're buying up foreign real estate in huge quantities in foreign countries. Secondly, continued rise of Chinese companies. As I mentioned, these companies, they go abroad now. What do they want? They want technology. A lot of German manufacturing companies, for example, are interesting for Chinese companies because they look at the technology and they know that they are not at that level yet. They can try to copy, but these German companies or manufacturers in Europe get smarter as well. It's not that easy to copy. They keep innovating, so they need to get access directly into these companies to understand how innovation works, how innovation is embedded in these organizations. Yeah, and I mentioned the case of Eandis earlier, but it seems this was only news in Flanders, maybe. I didn't realize that, so sorry about that. Then, a third one, and we go from individuals to companies to the Chinese state. This is something, yeah, you have a question there.
Are there two different types of technologies, like for Europe and for Africa?
Two different types of technologies?
Chinese want to sell something to Europe, plus that thing is very quality that
yeah. Definitely. I mean, this depends on, you could say, consumer preferences and consumer purchasing power. European consumers want indeed high quality products and are able and willing to pay for it. But in Africa, you have millions of people who don't have high purchasing power, but who are very interested in all kinds of consumer goods as well, and who get them from China. I mean, the Chinese presence in Africa is pretty amazing. I was there a few years ago in Benin, Benin, you say? Benin. I thought the Chinese were doing some infrastructure projects and that was it. Actually, the Chinese they are seeing Africa as an opportunity. So they are migrating there, they set up their shops, they set up their import-export businesses. I saw, for example, in Africa, a lot of people get around by motorbikes, because the roads are not always that good. Motorbikes is the best way to get around in many places. These motorbikes are exclusively sold by Chinese. They just have huge warehouses full of motorbikes. They produce them cheaply in China, they bring them to Africa. That's a business opportunity for them. Would they be able to sell these motorbikes in Europe? Probably not. Because they sell large volumes, not too nice features, cheap price. So they see a business opportunity in Africa where maybe European companies are not at all looking at that. The reason is, of course, that Chinese have lived just a few decades ago themselves this sort of transition from being poor peasants to starting to have money to be able to buy some goods. So they understand very well what African consumers need at this stage in the development. European companies seem to be less interested in that. So we'll see a continued rise in the global role for China, which will go along with its economic power. An example, a recent G20 summit was in China, organized in Hangzhou. China played an important role there. China is taking its place on the world stage. They don't accept anymore that the United States and Europe will decide what the next challenges are, what the direction is. No, China wants to have a say in that. As I mentioned, very important role they play in the global climate agreement. People have been criticizing China for a while that China was not doing enough. Actually, China is the biggest investor in green technology in the world. So they are very, very serious about climate change. More than the Americans, I would say, and more determined. They have also founded a few years ago the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as a sort of an equivalent or counterpart rather to the World Bank. The United States is not a member of this bank. So what this bank does is finance all kinds of big infrastructure projects, and China has a leading voice in that. So China is the one who decides where new projects will be invested, not anymore the United States. Because the institutions as we have them, World Bank, IMF and so on, these were created, let's say, after the Second World War, which is when the United States became important. Europe was in ruins after the war. We started losing the colonies after that, and the United States dominated the whole world infrastructure. This is now, step by step, changing. And this will lead to some geopolitical tensions as well. This may be something you heard about in the news, the South China Sea, where there's a few, actually, the Chinese are building some artificial islands there. There's actually not really islands, but they're making islands so that they can claim all the territory around the islands. But of course, all these neighboring countries, Philippines, Vietnam, and so on, Malaysia, they don't agree with that. They think they have a claim on those waters as well. But if you have an economic power like China against a country like the Philippines, it becomes difficult. You know, who's going to win? With time, every year, it just becomes more likely that the Philippines will just have to accept what China says because of fear of economic retaliation. If the Philippines try to make a fist against the Chinese and say, no, this is our waters, and the Chinese said, okay, no more foreign direct investment for you. We stop all projects in the Philippines. Okay, the impact on the economy is so big that they cannot make this stand. So this is a risk that many countries are facing around China, and this is also why they are keeping close ties with the US. On the one hand, they welcome the Chinese influence, they welcome no longer being dependent on the US, they welcome the money flowing in, but on the other hand, they realize also they may become very dependent on China, and therefore may lose out on other issues. So in conclusion, the question is, will this century, the century in which you guys will graduate, get your first job, start your families, and so on, will that be the Chinese century? Maybe first, a quote from somebody quite a while ago. Who knows this quote? Who knows who said this? Quand la Chine s'éveillera, le monde tremblera. Sounds very nice in French. Who said this? He said it in French. That's why I put it in French. Nobody?
It's not Churchill.
Not Churchill. Earlier. I don't know if Churchill could speak French. Maybe he could. I don't know. earlier. Nobody knows this? Guesses? 19th century. No? It's somebody who was defeated in Bologna. Napoleon, indeed. Napoleon said that already in the beginning of the 19th century. They said that he pointed at a map, pointing at China, and said, "Quand la Chine se verra, le monde tremblera." I think now, 200 years later, he's made a very good point, and it may become reality, what he said. As I said, China is reshaping the world step by step, as we know it. You don't see this overnight, you know? If you look at just what happens on a daily basis around you, nothing changes, right? But over time, if you look at what China was 10 years ago, it was so different from what it is now. So if you think about what it's going to be 10 years from now, okay, probably the economy will be double, right? Will be double the size, because it still grows at about 6 to 7%, so the total economy will double. That means it will become bigger than the United States and still grow further. So by far, it becomes the biggest economy in the world. In terms of middle-class consumers, we've seen we go from 100 million to 400 million in just the next decades. The Chinese power will just keep increasing, and the Chinese want this power to be reflected in you could say, the geopolitical infrastructure of our world. So they will not be satisfied by just taking a second place like they do today. They will want to be at least on equal par with the United States. Because obviously, military speaking, the United States is still a lot stronger than China, although also China is catching up very quickly. And it's quite possible, quite likely, that in this century where we're living, a lot of the important political decisions will no longer be made in the White House, but more and more in Zhongnanhai, the center where the Chinese government is based, and that the economic power will be determined in Shanghai, and not necessarily in New York. So this is something we need to get used to. Of course, I've shown you through the presentation, China has a lot of challenges as well. So this is not a given. This is why I put a question mark. There's still a lot of things that could happen in China that sort of make this reality not come through. The aging population, who knows? If this comes too quickly, if they don't manage to deal with that well, it could lead to weakening economy. And if the economy weakens, maybe a shift of power, the Communist Party losing the power, which could lead to division internally in the country, and which could actually bring China back down if they don't manage to keep the stability. So this is not a given, but we'll see. All right, I see it's 5:30, that means I have 15 minutes left, right? Sorry to keep you that long, guys, I just like to talk about China. Okay. Could do a little video, but it takes 10 minutes to set it up, so maybe we should skip the video. On fera à la fin. Ok, maintenant, je vais faire un petit effort en français. Vous m'excusez les erreurs que je vais commettre. Et je vais vous parler un petit peu des opportunités qu'offre la Hutong School, donc l'entreprise que j'ai fondée il y a 10 ans, pour vous, en tant qu'étudiant en Chine. Alors la Hutong School, on est une école privée de langue, donc on enseigne le chinois, mais on organise aussi un programme de stage, notamment à Pékin, Shanghai, Chengdu aussi, et l'année prochaine on aura aussi des stages à Hangzhou. On a quelques cours de chinois à Bruxelles aussi, mais c'est peut-être pas très important. La raison qu'on a créé cette Hutong School, qu'on a fondé la Hutong School, c'était vraiment parce qu'on voulait créer des opportunités pour des étudiants comme vous, qui parlent peut-être pas encore le chinois, qui n'ont pas été en Chine ou juste une fois en tourisme, qui ne connaissent pas vraiment la Chine, mais qui sont de plus en plus curieux, de plus en plus intéressés par la Chine. Parce qu'il faut le dire, dans les médias, on entend parler de la Chine de plus en plus, et je pense avec le discours que j'ai fait à la présentation, j'ai bien pu démontrer que la Chine va augmenter en puissance, qu'on le veuille ou pas. Alors, le programme que nous on offre, Internship Program, c'est un programme dans lequel on offre un placement de stage. Il y a aussi des cours de chinois, le logement, des activités culturelles, etc. Donc je vais vous expliquer point par point comment ça fonctionne et quels sont les services compris. Alors, pour le placement en stage, on a un réseau d'autour de 200, déjà autour de 300 maintenant, entreprises dans les grandes villes qui nous offrent des positions de stage, donc qui envoient des descriptions de stage dans leurs entreprises, dans différents domaines. Les stages, normalement, sont rémunérés. mais ce n'est pas une garantie. Donc les entreprises normalement offrent entre 1000 et 2000 renminbi, donc ça fait 125 jusqu'à 250 euros par mois, mais il y a aussi des stages non payés, donc ça dépend un peu. Et puis la manière dont ça fonctionne, d'abord vous pouvez faire une application sur le site, là vous chargez votre CV, puis on fait une interview avec vous directement par Skype, où on veut comprendre mieux quel type de stage est-ce que vous cherchez, quels sont vos intérêts, et aussi quelles sont les demandes de l'école. Parce qu'Elmo a certaines requirements, c'est pas comme conditions, ou oui, termes, auxquels les stages doivent répondre, pour bien être sûr qu'on vous trouve un projet qui correspond à ça. Après, le troisième point, c'est qu'il y aura une interview directement avec l'entreprise. Et là, c'est vraiment comme un job interview. Il faut bien se préparer, il faut être bien courant en anglais et se prouver. Parce que les entreprises interviewent beaucoup de gens. Ils peuvent aussi trouver des stagiaires localement, à Pékin, en Shanghai. Il y a plein d'étrangers qui font des études et qui sont prêts, qui ont besoin d'un stage aussi. Donc ils ne cherchent pas, ils ne prennent pas n'importe qui, il faut bien se prouver. Et puis quand à la fois l'entreprise et vous-même vous êtes convaincus de coopérer ensemble, on va envoyer les documents nécessaires pour obtenir le visa pour aller faire le stage en Chine. Alors en termes de domaine, comme j'ai dit, on a une grande variété. Je dirais la partie à droite, c'est plutôt tout ce qui est lié au business, donc ça peut être IT, marketing, sales, business development, etc. Côté à gauche, c'est plus pour des gens qui ont une certaine spécialisation autre que ça. Donc, par exemple, le design, ou vous avez fait des études de droit, ou logistique, ou engineering, etc. En général, on a une offre assez large et on trouve, pour les gens qui font une demande des écoles avec qui on travaille directement, plus de 90%, on a un pourcentage de réussite, je dirais, de plus de 90%. Donc, normalement, ceux qui font une demande, ils sont sérieux, vous aurez un stage qui correspond à ce que vous cherchez. Par contre, j'ai appris qu'il y a une deadline assez... c'était quelle date ? Mi-novembre, n'est-ce pas ? Pour avoir le projet bien ficelé. Donc, c'est important de ne pas traîner trop, de faire la demande suffisamment vite pour que nous, on ait suffisamment de temps aussi pour prouver le projet qui sera approuvé par l'école. Le type d'entreprise avec qui on travaille, il y a quelques grands noms comme Lenovo ou BMW, mais principalement, c'est des entreprises, des PME internationales. L'avantage là, c'est que c'est des entreprises plus petites, vous travaillerez en équipe avec moins de gens, et dans ces entreprises-là, il y a toujours des projets qui sont là pour lesquels personne n'a le temps. Tandis que dans des multinationales, souvent, si vous voulez faire un certain projet, il faut passer par plusieurs personnes pour l'avoir approuvé. Après, vous avez besoin d'accès à certaines données et ça traîne encore certaines semaines pour l'obtenir, etc. Si tu travailles dans une petite entreprise, ce problème ne se pose pas et les stages sont vraiment beaucoup plus intéressants, beaucoup plus hands-on, je dirais. Puis, il y a des cours de chinois avec le stage, 4 heures par semaine. Le but n'est évidemment pas que vous appreniez à parler le chinois couramment juste en quelques mois. Ça, malheureusement, c'est pas possible. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des gens qui ont déjà fait des cours de chinois. Oui, un peu. En Chine ou ici ? Ici, d'accord. Et vous aussi un peu ? Oui, un tout petit peu. Ok. Donc là, le but, chez nous, on fait une séparation assez stricte entre le chinois parlé et le chinois écrit. Donc c'est souvent les caractères qui font peur, si on veut apprendre le chinois, mais le chinois parlé est beaucoup plus simple de ce qu'on pense. Et la raison, je vais vous expliquer tout de suite. Le but donc, c'est de pouvoir vous débrouiller un petit peu mieux dans la vie quotidienne, parce que comme j'ai expliqué avant, aux entreprises, oui, les gens parlent anglais, dans la vie quotidienne, très peu. Donc pour bien s'exprimer, un peu de chinois peut être utile. En plus, c'est énormément apprécié par les Chinois quand on s'exprime en chinois. Moi, ça fait plus de 15 ans presque que j'ai voyagé en Chine et que j'ai vécu là-bas pendant 6 ans. Je me souviens que la première semaine que j'étais là, je disais quelque part à un Chinois « Ni hao » et il disait déjà « Waouh, ton chinois est merveilleux ». C'était le seul mot que je savais. Ils disent la même chose 11 ans plus tard. Donc voilà, ça montre juste que pour les Chinois, un étranger qui parle le chinois, qui essaie de parler le chinois, ils seront toujours reconnaissants. Que vous faites des erreurs ou pas, c'est pas très grave, ils trouvent ça génial. Ça est un peu lié à ce que j'ai mentionné dans la présentation antérieure, c'est un peu ce sentiment d'infériorité et que maintenant, il y a une reconnaissance. Avant, la Chine était inférieure, était pauvre, était dominée par les étrangers. Et maintenant, la Chine revient et il y a les étrangers qui reconnaissent la Chine. Ce n'est plus seulement les Chinois qui doivent apprendre l'anglais, c'est aussi les étrangers qui apprennent le chinois. Donc ça, c'est énormément apprécié. Et puis, bon, les caractères à écrire, c'est pas facile. À reconnaître, en fait, c'est beaucoup plus facile que ce qu'on pense aussi si on est en Chine. S'il faut apprendre ça ici, c'est un peu dur, parce qu'on ne les voit pas partout. En Chine, on les voit partout, donc dès que tu apprends à reconnaître un certain caractère, tu commences à le voir partout et tu le retiens assez vite. Bon, le grammaire en chinois est assez simple. J'ai pris un verbe français parce que c'est ce que j'ai dû apprendre quand j'étais petit. Je peux vous dire, c'est assez douloureux. Pour vous, ça va plus naturellement. Un verbe chinois, c'est un seul mot. Ça ne change jamais. Donc si c'est je, tu, lui, elle, aucune différence, ça reste la même chose. Présent, futur, passé, pas de différence. Donc toute la complexité du grammaire français n'existe pas en chinois. Donc un verbe, si vous dites tu, bah, très bien, vous avez appris votre premier verbe. C'est vite fini. Après, peut-être il y en a parmi vous qui ont dû apprendre un peu d'allemand, ou qui ont choisi d'apprendre un peu allemand. Moi j'ai dû faire ça aussi. Assez douloureux aussi, parce qu'il y a toutes ces différentes formes d'articles. En Chine, ça n'existe pas. Il n'y a pas la différence entre masculin et féminin. C'est une invention un peu bizarre, ils trouvent des Européens. Ça n'existe tout simplement pas. Donc un livre, bah, c'est livre, livre, livre. Ça peut être un livre, le livre, des livres. Ça ne fait pas de différence. Ça reste la même chose. Donc on peut vite apprendre une première phrase en chinois pour vous montrer la simplicité. Wo, ça veut dire moi. Je, plutôt. Je. Voilà. Je ou moi en chinois, ce serait la même chose. Wo. Oui, très bien. Tu. Tu. Oui, allez. Zhongguo. Ça, c'est la Chine. Donc, si on met tout en une fois. Wo, tu. Zhongguo. Ah, très bien, très bien. Ben voilà, la première phrase est apprise. Et c'était pas compliqué, n'est-ce pas? Là, vous voyez les caractères pour la Chine. De nouveau, vous voyez le premier caractère que j'ai mentionné tout au début de la présentation pour la langue chinoise, Zhongwen, donc le milieu. Et le deuxième, là, vous voyez en fait un roi avec autour de lui une frontière. Donc ça, c'est la notion d'un pays. Donc c'est le pays au milieu. J'ai oublié l'expression en français pour ça. Comment on dit ça en français? L'empire du milieu, c'est ça? Oui, l'empire du milieu. Voilà, ça vient de ça. Bon, apprendre le chinois, ça peut être utile parce que la traduction en anglais des Chinois n'est pas toujours très correcte. Ask the order to wait for a ship. Aucune idée ce que ça veut dire. Si tu lis le chinois, tu comprendras. Bon, il y a un autre là à droite que je ne vais pas prononcer à haute voix parce que sinon je vais avoir des problèmes avec Elmo. Mais voilà, il y a ces caractères-là. Le premier qui a plusieurs sens en chinois, et les Chinois ne sont pas toujours conscients de quel sens ils doivent choisir pour la traduction. Ok, dans le programme aussi, il y a le logement. Le logement est organisé dans des appartements partagés. Tout le monde a sa chambre à lui. Et puis, il y a les espaces en commun, comme la cuisine, etc. Donc c'est comme un cote, si vous avez un logement en cote, c'est plus ou moins la même chose. Donc ils sont complètement, comment on dit ça, fully equipped, je ne sais pas comment on dit ça en français, bien aménagés. Vous devez rien apporter pour vous loger là-bas. Évidemment, c'est des logements d'étudiants. C'est pas non plus des compounds de luxe dans les meilleurs compounds de Shanghai ou Pékin. Ne rêvez pas trop non plus, vous n'y allez pas comme des expats. Hein, ça, c'est pour plus tard. Puis, on organise des activités culturelles avec le programme. Là, le but vraiment, c'est de présenter plusieurs aspects de la culture chinoise, comme par exemple le kung-fu, tai chi, cooking class, la calligraphie, etc. Mais aussi des excursions où le but est vraiment de vous montrer des côtés de la Chine que vous ne verrez peut-être pas vous-même si vous allez à la découverte de la Chine. Donc, on ne va pas vous amener à la cité interdite à Pékin, ça c'est trop facile. Mais il y a des petits villages autour de Pékin, 2-3 heures de route, pas facile à y arriver, mais où tu vois un monde complètement différent. Et où tu vois ce contraste entre la grande ville développée, comme Pékin, Shanghai, et puis la zone, la campagne, où oui, les gens ont déjà le smartphone, mais autre que ça, c'est pas encore génial. Donc ça montre un autre visage de la Chine, ce qui est important, parce que si vous passez 4 mois à Shanghai, il y a un grand risque que vous pensiez à votre tour que Shanghai, c'est la Chine. Et donc, la Chine, elle est déjà là, quoi. Tout est déjà fait et ils nous ont déjà dépassés, ce qui n'est pas le cas. Et puis d'autres services, le premier jour, on vient vous chercher à l'aéroport, on vous amène à l'appartement, on fait l'enregistrement local chez la police locale, très important, si vous l'oubliez, il risque d'avoir une amende au retour. Il y a le property management, donc s'il y a des problèmes dans l'appartement, quelque chose qui est cassé, vous voulez acheter quelque chose de plus, on est là, on a une équipe sur place qui peut vous aider avec tout ça. Alors, pourquoi faire ça? Pourquoi faire votre stage en Chine et pas ici? C'est quand même beaucoup plus simple de le faire ici. La première raison, je dirais, c'est pour l'expérience et le développement personnel. C'est pour la plupart des gens la première expérience vraiment de vivre loin de chez soi. Hein. Vivre de l'autre côté du monde, hors d'Europe. Peut-être en tourisme, il y en a qui ont déjà découvert une partie du monde hors de l'Europe, mais c'est quand même un monde très différent. Et en plus, je pense que c'est pour votre CV une très bonne addition. Si vous pouvez montrer à des futurs employeurs que vous avez pris ce pas, vous avez pris ce challenge, vous n'aviez pas peur d'aller découvrir la Chine et vous lancer dans une aventure avec beaucoup d'incertitudes, je pense pour un employeur, ça montre quand même que vous êtes un profil au moins dynamique, qui n'a pas peur d'un challenge. Si vous restez près de chez vous, rien de mauvais avec ça, mais je pense qu'en termes de développement personnel, ça va aller plus lentement. Deuxièmement, il y a les skills. Pas juste les hard skills, je veux dire pas juste ce que vous apprenez à l'école et que vous allez mettre en pratique, mais aussi les soft skills. Et les soft skills, notamment en Chine, par la différence culturelle, il y a quand même un grand défi là. Typiquement, il y a des Chinois qui disent certaines phrases que si on traduit littéralement, on ne va pas bien comprendre. Ingai mei wenti, par exemple, ça veut dire ça ne devrait pas être un problème. Garantie que c'est un problème. Mais il dit, ouais, ça ne devrait pas être un problème. Vous êtes garanti que ce sera un problème. S'il dit, mais ben, littéralement, ça veut dire, il n'y a pas de manière, je ne peux pas vous aider. Restez là, posez quelques questions de plus, vous allez voir, il va appeler quelqu'un d'autre et ça s'arrange quand même. Mais ça, c'est des choses qu'il faut apprendre sur place. On peut lire ça dans des livres, communication interculturelle, mais il faut la vivre dans la vie réelle, on va retenir. Et puis, le réseau, network, moi je constate à chaque fois que les gens qui passent 3-4 mois en Chine construisent un réseau énorme. Parce que quand vous êtes de l'autre côté du monde, vous allez rencontrer tellement de gens, que ce soit à la hutong school d'autres stagiaires, que ce soit à votre entreprise des collègues avec leurs amis, que ce soit par des événements des chambres de commerce, vous avez vraiment d'opportunités de rencontrer énormément de monde. Et ça, c'est très utile pour la carrière plus tard. Que ce soit pour trouver un emploi, mais aussi de nouveau pour montrer à un employeur futur que oui, vous n'écrivez pas juste simplement sur votre CV que vous êtes social ou que vous allez bien faire des liens. Non, vous montrez sur LinkedIn que vous connaissez 500 personnes. Ça fait la différence. Donc, pour les employeurs, c'est important parce que des gens qui connaissent plus de gens, souvent, sont plus productifs. Dès qu'il y a un petit problème, vous pouvez appeler quelqu'un pour un conseil, etc. Vous réussissez mieux à résoudre des problèmes. Si vous n'avez pas de réseau, il faut tout chercher sur Internet et vous ne connaissez pas des spécialistes dans les différents domaines, vous êtes un peu handicapé. Ok, alors, pour résumer, donc le programme, qu'est-ce qui est inclus? Le placement de stage, le logement, avec tous les frais aussi, l'Internet, etc. Shanghai, il y a un petit supplément par mois, je vous montre le prix total tout de suite. Les cours de chinois, il y a aussi un e-learning toolkit, donc c'est certains apps que vous pouvez utiliser gratuitement grâce à la hutong school sur votre portable pour apprendre le chinois quand vous êtes en métro. Des activités culturelles, l'airport pick-up, etc. Bon, hutong school, c'est une école privée. Donc, c'est pas comme Elmo, je pense, qui est une école publique, n'est-ce pas? Ou moitié, je ne sais pas. Ou comme une université qui reçoit de l'argent de l'État pour organiser les programmes. Nous sommes à 100% privés, donc le coût est lié à ça. Pour un programme de 4 mois, on s'est mis d'accord avec Elmo sur une remise de 10% pour les étudiants d'Elmo. Donc le prix est autour de 4 300 € pour ce programme. C'est une somme considérable, donc il faut bien réfléchir financièrement si c'est quelque chose que vous voulez faire ou pas. Mais je voudrais souligner que je pense qu'il faut le voir comme un investissement. C'est pas comme vous dépensez 2 000 € pour aller faire le tour du monde et faire du tourisme. C'est 4 000 € que vous investissez dans votre profil, dans votre carrière future, et je pense, pour la plupart des gens, c'est un investissement qui se rembourse au fil et à mesure des années. Ok, bon, bref, pour terminer, parce que je vois qu'il est bien 6h moins le quart, si vous êtes intéressé par ce programme, j'ai laissé quelques brochures ici. Vous pouvez trouver les liens d'application sur notre site. On vous enverra la présentation, donc il n'y a pas besoin de noter ça. Il y a aussi un peu d'informations sur comment préparer votre CV pour le challenge en Chine. Et ben voilà, j'espère que comme chaque année, on pourra donner la bienvenue à quelques étudiants parmi vous. Merci beaucoup pour votre